Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. My name is Jenelle Hamblin. I'm the manager of swine health with Manitoba Pork, and I'd like to welcome you all here today to our meeting. Welcome to the third session of the Manitoba Pork Online Producer Engagement Series. Today's presentation is titled Strep Zoo, the scariest pig disease you've never heard of. We are very fortunate to be joined by Barrie Russell and Chris Penner with Maple Leaf to provide us with their experiences related to Strep Zoo that they've dealt with. Also on the call, we have practitioners from Maple Leaf, the Maple Leaf veterinary team, and Dr. Mateus Costa from the Western College of Veterinary Medicine, who will be sharing with us his work on Strep Zoo as well. Please note that should you have questions throughout the presentation, please leave them in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Lastly, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on our website should you need to refer back to it or would like to share it with anybody that you feel could benefit. So again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And with that, I welcome Barrie and Chris to share with us their experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Jenelle. Thanks, Jenelle and Manitoba Pork for allowing us the opportunity to share a little bit about our experience and what we know about this bacteria, Strep Zoo. So I also would like to thank everybody else that has taken the time today to join the call and to listen in. Hopefully it can be very informative. It can provide some insight into what to look for and as well how to respond. So maybe before I get started, I'll introduce myself. My name is Chris Penner. I've been working for Maple Leaf / Elite Swine now for what I've realized is half my life. So I've got about 18 years experience working with pigs, working in all facets. Started working on the ground floor as a tech, dealing with gilt rearing, gilt development, managing nurseries, finishers, sow barns, and overseeing the whole scope of work. So that's kind of my experience in the industry. I'm going to let my co-presenters, Barrie Russell, chime in a little bit, and I believe Dr. Brad Loggy as well, just to introduce themselves a little bit. Barrie?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give a brief bio of myself. I'm showing a video for anybody who doesn't know me. Yes, I grew up in the European hog industry. I've got over 30 years experience of mostly sow multiplication and boar station experience. A little bit of multiplication as well for some of the hog barn companies that operate in Europe, in France and in the UK. I came to Canada in 2004 and moved to Maple Leaf with the Puritone acquisition. And I currently I am a manager of hog production for about 7,000 sows. And it's my great pleasure to have all the Strep Zoo farms under my control. So they decided that would be the most obvious answer, is to keep one person in charge of all the bugs in one area. So that's a brief background to me. I'll hand it over to Brad Laggy.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dr. Brad Loggy, and I've been working in the swine industry, kind of all aspects of swine production, I guess, since 1998, so about 22 years now, and spent most of that time working with companies, both High Life, used to be called the Vilford Jansen Group when I started with them. Kind of shows how long ago it was. And Puritone, and like Barrie, kind of transitioned over to Maple Leaf about roughly about 8 years ago, I guess. So yeah, I've kind of seen a lot of different things in the swine world when it comes to the veterinary medicine side of things, and production side of things. And this was definitely one that really kind of was different and took us by storm.
Yeah, thanks, Brad and Barrie. Jenelle, I don't see the presentation on the screen. Maybe that's just me. I've been trying to share my video as well. People want to see my face, probably not, but if they do, I'm not being allowed to share.
Is anybody else having issues seeing the title slide of the presentation?
I can see it.
I can see it.
I can see it.
Yep, I can see it.
All right, maybe just me. So we're going to run through a few things in the presentation. I guess I'll go over the agenda a little bit. We're going to start with me and Barrie will take turns a little bit going back and forth, talking, kind of sharing a story, trying to put you in place of at a farm going through a break, what it kind of looks like. We'll talk a little bit what Strep zoo is, the history of the disease that is in swine, what we know. Dr. Brad will discuss that, and then we'll go through some stuff at the end on just what you need to know. So if you can imagine this with me, picture this. It's your normal morning. You're getting ready to go to the barn. You go to the barn. You go to the office. You have your coffee, maybe just your normal routine, and it's time to go in the barn. You get your boots on. You get your coveralls on. You go into the barn. You start doing just your regular daily walkthrough. And as you're doing your walkthrough, you kind of get to a section of the barn, let's just say for the scenario that you get to gestation. And you notice that there's a small percentage of your herd that's maybe not eating. There's maybe 10% of your animals that are not eating. They don't look too bad, maybe a little less energy, a little lethargic, but nothing that really stands out. You quickly start to consider, oh, maybe it's summer, maybe it's heat. Maybe it's just because it's in a small area of the barn. Maybe it's just the airflow for some reason is not working. Maybe a fan's down or something. You start ruling things out, and you think, do we vaccinate these sows? Were they just recently vaccinated? Maybe worst case, it's a toxin, a mycotoxin in the feed. But again, it's more to a certain area of the barn, and it's not widespread. So you decide to do your due diligence. You check some temperatures just to check to see if any sows are running a fever. And nothing seems out of the ordinary. There's no high temperatures. There's nothing that causes huge alarm, other than you see a few sows maybe just not eating and a little lethargic. You think not much more of it, thinking, if it continues, maybe I'll talk to a vet in a day or two if these ones don't start eating. But right now, there's nothing that really raises your alarm. So you go about your day. You finish your walkthrough. You do some chores. You chat with some of your team. You go have break. After break, you just have this gut feeling that you need to go check it again. You need to go check those animals. And upon returning to look at those animals, that's when you see some things have changed quite drastically. The animals no longer look just a little lethargic. You start to see more signs. And this one is the one that still haunts me. You start seeing on the sows, their eyes are red. They're very bloodshot. It's something that if you talk to somebody who's gone through a break and has had to deal with this for any number of days or weeks, it's something that's probably the first thing that they'll tell you is just how you can't get that image out of your mind. So the sows will be laying on the ground and very red-eyed. You start seeing the color of the skin of these sows. It's looking different, a lot more splotchy, flushed. Around the ears, the ears they almost turn a purplish color. The sows no longer get up. You can't even get them up to get to feed or to water. They don't have any energy. They're just laying down. You start even seeing sometimes it looks almost like they're panting, tongues kind of hanging out of their mouth, maybe a little bit of foam around the nostrils, around the mouth area that is starting to form. You quickly go check some temperatures, and you realize these temperatures, although you took them on these same sows just hours earlier, they have recently just shot up, and you realize that something serious is happening. And so as you're doing your assessment, you're trying to gather your information so that you can make a call to your herd vet. These sows that in the morning just were off feed, weren't showing any real symptoms, were now starting to die right in front of you. And in my case, after 18 years, some of you guys on this call, probably more years experience than that, it's something you have not experienced before. Maybe those of you that have been around long enough to deal with some really bad PRRS or really bad circle breaks, you start getting some flashbacks from there. But it's something as quickly and swiftly as these sows change, something that you just haven't experienced before. and I apologize, I can't see any slides. So if it's not to the next one, you can flip to the next one.
Yeah, it's, this is slide 4 now. So we're just talking about it spreads throughout the herd, and I think that's something that Chris and I experienced. Just the sheer speed of infection is quite incredible. We're talking situations where these animals, that if you spot an animal that's sick, to what Chris was describing earlier, by the time you've gone to get drugs to treat that animal, she dies literally in front of you. It's quite incredible. There is a tipping point where if you don't get the treatments in on time, you're not recovering any of these animals. And over the next few days, the mortalities just go up and up and up. I mean, yeah, at the peak, and you and your staff are removing 20 to 30 animals per day. I would say that's light. That's an underestimation. If you're in a 3,000 sow barn and you don't get in front of this thing, you're looking at 50, 60, 70 dead sows a day. It is quite incredible how it moves through your barn. And yeah, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say, like, just picture if you have 2 or 3 Herculeses in your barn running for 10 to 12 hours straight. Your batteries are dying before you can get all these animals out of the barn on the worst of the worst days.
Yeah. If you can imagine, it takes 45 minutes to process a dead animal. In other words, you go into a pen, you put it on the Hercules, and you take it out. It takes 45 minutes to get that animal into the dead bin. Then you can imagine, you can just add up the man hours just dealing with mortalities. It's a horrendous experience, and it's something that you'll never forget. And abortions are another issue that we saw a lot of. In the gilts especially, sows a little bit, but not so much. But the gilts especially, if the gilt didn't die, she aborted. Basically, that was the story. She was trying to preserve her own life, and she threw her litter. So I would estimate a lot of those gilts we didn't get to farrow at all. They threw their litters and then never came back on heat. So it is horrendous. Working with the vets, we tried combinations of injecting antibiotics and water meds as well. One of the things we did learn was you cannot rely on water meds at the start of the infection. It's good to get the water meds in front of the sows, but if you get animals that are sick, they don't drink. So you have to do a combination of both. You have to do injections of antibiotics followed up with water-based medication. It wasn't unheard of for my team to go in and inject 3, 4, 5 pens of loose housing sows a day, which would be roughly about 600 or 700 sows. They would go in and do that, and they would go back and do it again the next day and the next day and the next day, just to keep them alive. So it was just a horrendous level of treatments, and you can imagine that sows don't like getting poked with a needle at the best of times. So you can imagine if they start to resent, the human coming into the pen or the crate with that needle again, right? Even if it is to save their life, they start to resent you. So we had a lot of work treating animals, and yes, we did save animals. That was great. We did, but we didn't save all of them, and we had to accept some pretty horrendous losses. Conception rate in the weeks of a bad strep infection, until you get ahead of this infection, you can assume 2 or 3 weeks of very poor conception rates. We had barns, my 2 large barns were running around 92% conception rate on a GCF system, and those high infection weeks we would plummet to 60% conception rates, and those weeks we ended up farrowing under 50% by the time the gestation period was over. Just really, really high numbers of dropouts. Nurse offs, we saw a lot as well. So as it transitions through your barn, it starts off in your gilt, and it'll move around the barn, and it takes several weeks to get to. It can take a couple of weeks to come into your farrowing area as you bring sows into farrow. So if you see that moving in there, then you start to see your nurse offs coming up. We have rooms with 25% nurses in the room. Appetites are suppressed, milk production is suppressed, wean numbers are low, and then when you wean your sows, they don't come into heat very well either. So it's very difficult. So what we did was we medicated hard, and we kept salicylates going through the farrowing rooms to try and keep the sows feeling a little bit better in themselves. And we also tried to go with an autogenous vaccine developed on farm, and we did that with our gilt herds that were our gilt entries that were coming in. So in the Q barn, we'd vaccinate in the Q barn, and then we'd vaccinate 5 to 6 weeks pre-farrow on all the animals in the sow barn as well, including the gilts, to get a double up, which I think helped a little, but it didn't give any lasting protection. So, and I'll go into that in a little bit actually. So we decided that because we had lost about 25% of our sows, it was still a viable herd. So we thought one of the theories was that strep was piggybacking some of our other diseases that were on the farm, and if we could eradicate those other diseases, then possibly we could let strep zoo burn itself out like other diseases. We didn't know. We just didn't know how this was going to work. But as you can imagine, depuping 6,000 sows is a very expensive option. So we decided that we'd close the herds for 6 to 8 months. We didn't bring any gilts in, and we cleaned the place up. Now, one point I would make is as soon as we stopped bringing gilts into the strep zoo herds, everything calmed down. We managed, those that died had died. The ones that had survived did okay. We medicated and they did recover a little bit, but we didn't bring gilts in for 7 months. We did a cleanup on farm where we cleaned everything up. It wasn't quite a PED cleanup, but it was pretty close. It was a PERS wash, and we cleaned it all up. We bred off site to fill some holes in, and we brought our animals back about 7 months later. That was this year. So we brought them back, and things looked good for the first few weeks, 6 weeks in, and then it all went horribly wrong again. And our gilts that we brought in several hundreds worth of gilts into the farms, and those gilts that we brought in actually succumbed to strep. Despite all our best intentions, came in with vaccinated for strep. They didn't make it. We lost a huge number of gilts, and it was pretty obvious that it was stable in the short term, but as soon as you brought in any naive animals, it just flared up again, and it killed a lot of gilts, and it killed a lot of P1s, and it affected some of the sows that were still in the herd from the previous year, but it destabilized the health all over again. And it did seem to make sense that any kind of stress brought this on. So it's living in the sow the whole time. It's in their cells. It's in the body. And then when you bring in a stressor, it can reinfect the animal. Heat, vaccination, we've got down here, water and feed shortages. One interesting fact was when we first broke with strep zoo, excuse me, we didn't vaccinate our gilt dynamic pen, just because for that very reason. We held off our vaccines. We let them settle down for a good month, and then we decided, well, we better start vaccinating these animals to protect the piglets for all the other diseases that we have, the normal. And as soon as we vaccinated those gilts, it was the trigger, and they just exploded with strep zoo. So you have a situation where any kind of stressor would seems to start it off. We had one of the other herds, they brought in gilts that went down with flu, and that was enough to start their strep zoo infection breakout. So it seems to be that once you have it in your herd, you really don't have much alternative. We've tried all the options, and it really is a depup is the only long-term solution. The sheer cost, the manpower, to drugs, to your production, I mean, you end up with 25%, 30% less. So if you do a good job, you end up with 30% less sows in your herd because you're not bringing anything in, and your production goes down because your sows are getting older and older. So, and it's just waiting there to explode. So, yeah, that about covers our experiences. If there's, I think that's about it for the moment.
Yeah, so Barry's talked a lot about, in quite detail actually, just how devastating it is to a herd. Um, we'll talk probably a little bit more on how devastating it is to employees, but all of that stuff obviously has a big impact. So what is Strep Zoo? This is our experience of this is what we've seen. So Strep Zoo, Streptococcus zooepidemicus, I believe I said that right. It's a bacteria. It's Group C Group C strep that was first identified by Pierre Edwards in 1943. A subspecies of Strep equi, which is commonly isolated in horses. We know that with streps, there's many different strains. So some stuff I don't know, it's gram-positive and non-motile. One thing I can attest to, though, this particular strain is extremely aggressive, especially on sows. So the impact of the bacteria on the animals, it can infect many species, including horses, like we mentioned, cows, rabbits, obviously pigs, dogs, cats, and monkeys. Inflammation of the thorax and lymph nodes, bronchial pneumonia, sepsis, and death. The organism can be found in normal floral bacteria in several species, but it behaves very opportunistically, infecting wounds, respiratory system, and the uterine environment when it's given the chance. It's not a very commonly isolated in swine, which is why it's so rare, and which is why, with the experience we had never experienced it before. There's only been 6 reported over the past 10 years by Iowa State Vet Lab. The impact of it on people, this was a concern that we obviously had working around these animals. So Strep Zoo can be acquired by people through close contact, especially if your basic biosecurity is not being followed. So wearing gloves, washing your hands, dirty coveralls, boots, stuff like that, dust masks. So if you don't follow those things, it is possible for people to get it, but it is very seldomly been isolated in humans. And so infection of it is very, very rare. The only
Chris, you're breaking up just a little bit there.
Are in the elderly
Chris, sorry to interrupt. Your audio is not coming through very clearly.
So cases of human infections related to, so like I said before,
Barrie, I'm not sure, or Brad, if you want to take on bullet 3. Sorry, Chris, your audio is cutting out quite badly here for the last portion of the slide.
Yeah, well, I could let Brad take this one, because he's going to talk to the next slide anyway.
Sure, yeah, I can do that. Okay, so impact of bacteria in people, Strep epidemicus can be acquired by people through close contact with animals, especially if basic biosecurity precautions aren't being followed. However, it has seldom been isolated in people, and infection is pretty rare. Usually involves immunocompromised people that have been working in close contact with infected animals and just haven't had good biosecurity protocols in place. Especially elderly people who have been working in close contact with horses. So there's been the odd case where someone has ended up getting a bit of an infection with Strep zooepidemicus. Prior to 2017, there's roughly about 32 cases of human infections worldwide related to Strep zoo. So, we had some concerns about, the people that were working with these animals, and we made sure that we had discussions with anyone who was immunocompromised or who had anyone else who lived with them who was immunocompromised, and then in most cases, we transfer those people into other farms just to reduce the risk of having any problems. We also, we were curious, and we wanted to make sure that, we weren't putting other farms at risk if we moved people around. And so we asked the staff if they would be willing to have us do some swabbing to make sure that they weren't actually carrying the bug. And we had 32 people that volunteered to be swabbed, and we couldn't find Strep zooepidemicus in those culture swabs. So it doesn't seem like it transfers easily to people. Let's put it that way. Next slide. So when we first received the diagnosis, we could find very little information on the disease. From veterinarians to production people with long histories in the industry, more than 20 years, nobody seemed to have much knowledge about it in swine. It's very common in other animals, but not in swine. And didn't really find anybody that had experience with it. Reached out to roughly over 60 different animal health professionals, specialists, labs, trying to learn more about the disease from anywhere around the world. And there wasn't very much information available out there. Did come across some literature though regarding outbreaks of Strep zooepidemicus in pigs dating back to like the 1970s. There was like a report of like one outbreak, that involved the loss of over 300,000 pigs, but it was in China, and it was, kind of questionable, I guess, how valid the history and all the details of this was. And we knew that Strep zooepidemicus was very common in other animals and everything, and at the time we thought that it must be just a commensal bacteria, one of those things that you find from time to time, and we didn't really think that it had the potential that it did. In some other animals in different outbreaks, occasionally there would be signs of septicemia, such as fever, inflammation, pneumonia, swollen lymph nodes, repro infection, death. But again, at the time, we thought this was just a run-of-the-mill Strep zooepidemicus and wasn't capable of causing the kind of damage that we saw. After doing some collaboration with some of the labs and some of the people in the labs that are capable of doing some of the genetic sequencing and breaking it down and really looking at this bacteria more closely, like Dr. Mateus Costa, turned out this serotype actually matched up with that same strain that had caused all the damage in China. And that strain is known as ST194. So since that time, there's been regular communications about Strep zoo happening with the Manitoba Chief Veterinary Office, Canadian Western Swine Health Intelligence Network, QUISHN. It's a group of swine veterinarians, lab people, and others here in Western Canada. Other swine vets in the industry, epidemiologists, and others across Canada and the U.S. throughout this outbreak, and continuing on even to this day as we learn more information about this bacteria and how it affects pigs. We can't say for certain how this infection came into our herd to start with, but kind of suspect, based on that sequencing, that it matches up with the China strain, that maybe it was transmitted by some kind of a fomite, either a person or maybe some kind of material that traveled internationally and was infected with the bacteria. And in spite of having very, very good biosecurity protocols in the original farm where this got started, somehow it managed to slip through the barriers. So that's what we suspect anyway, because this particular strain has never been seen in North America before, actually, in swine. That's it.
Okay, so what do you need to know? Well, movement Now this is something that we unfortunately took a hit on because the original farm was sending gilts out, which didn't help. So if it happened in an individual farm, that might have been a little bit less of an impact, but because it shipped breeding gilts out, then it made it very difficult for us, because we ended up with 3 farms plus the original farm that was infected. So it comes down to a little bit of the biosecurity issue again. You've got 3 chances to stop this. People, the pigs coming in, equipment coming in. So you need to make sure that if you suspect anything on your farm, if you see animals that have any of these symptoms that we are describing today, stop all movement. It's not an irreversible decision if you close your herd for a few days to make sure, because once this thing moves, it just moves. So if it does show up in your farm, freeze all movement, get in touch with your vet. We've got lots of expertise on Strep Zoo nowadays, and we can get these to the labs. They're all used to dealing with Strep Zoo now, so we can get confirmation of tests pretty quickly. Disease is spread nose-to-nose contact. I know it sounds obvious, but we did notice this a lot in our loose housing barns in Maple Leaf, that you would see it start in your loose housing pens. You would on your feed balances on the operating system, it would show up as 10, 15 sows wouldn't be eating, and then as a pen would break with Strep Zoo, you would see it move. It'd move east or west to the next pen and just slowly work its way through. And as sure as night follows day, you knew it was going. So there is an opportunity where you can get in front of this and start to medicate and inject ahead of time if it's happening, if you can get in at the start. So once you have it in your farm, it's going to move around the farm. And as I explained earlier, it does take days or a couple of weeks to move from one side of the farm to the other, but it will happen. There's no stopping it once it's in. Obviously, we don't want to move this thing around the province, so these animals shouldn't be shipped to anywhere where they're gathering up animals to then send to different areas. So you have to send these animals straight away to a different outlet. They can't be mixed with anything. Chris touched on it a little bit about the personal protective equipment. Maple Leaf's standard for the Maple Leaf employees to wear a good selection of PPE as per normal, and I think that really helps. We didn't have to persuade anyone to wear gloves, masks, ear protection. All that is standard, but it really helped when we're dealing with a lot of infections and treatments. And one of the things is you're under a lot of pressure to remove deads, treat animals. It's very dangerous environment. You're treating hundreds of sows a day. As I said before, the sows get very cranky. You got hundreds of sows in a barn that don't want to be needled, and you have to needle them. You're using a Hercules all day. You're tired, so it's very important that we maintain, staff safety and staff well-being. And that something we talked about a lot when we went through it, Chris and I, was if you do break with this disease, do not have new employees in your barn if you're dealing with this disease. We hire staff that care, and we deliberately target people to hire in our facilities that care for animals. And now what they're doing is they're spending all day euthanizing, dragging deads out. So even crusty old timers like myself would go home at the end of a very long day and feel it was very hopeless. So I would advise anyone not to have new staff in. If you need to move staff around, make sure they're experienced, they know their way around the barn, and they've dealt with mortalities before. Do not have any new staff in that facility. It's very tough on staff. Very tough on staff.
Yeah, can I chime in for a sec, Barrie?
Absolutely, Chris. Welcome back.
Sorry, guys, about the disconnection there. Bad internet, I guess. Yeah, the staff aspect can't be understated. I mean, the staff will need support. Your regular team on farm is going, if they have to deal with it themselves, they will struggle. Because like Barrie said, our staff, we train them to care for animals, to try to keep every animal alive. And now their role is basically completely flipped. And so you need support, you need to help, you need to sometimes be a listening ear. There was times when I was on farm talking with some of the staff, and these are even staff that had been working for 10 years in the barn, and they were crying over some of the stuff that they were having to deal with. It's just, it felt hopeless. I think that's probably the big word. I think Barrie even used it. It's kind of a hopeless feeling. You're injecting, you're doing all you can to help these animals, but at the end, all you're doing is going to get the Hercules. And that was that. At least that's how it felt. And so the staff support is critically important.
Thanks, Chris. Now we talked a little bit about antibiotic treatment. Now we found we used certain antibiotic that helped our 2 large sow barns, and it was basically the only thing that stopped us from completely imploding when it came to this infection. So we used it extensively. It saved our sows, it saved production, but at a cost. It's a very expensive proposition. Water medicating and injecting with high cost injectable antibiotics every day for weeks on end. It would take 2 or 3 pulses of water meds in your sows to get a hold of this thing. You would basically, you had to go 3 weeks of water meds with some breaks in between to give them fresh water. But unless you did that, you basically couldn't get ahead of this infection. So very expensive. So not the type of thing you want in your farm, because it costs you a small fortune, or a large fortune actually, and you still lose 25 to 30% of your sows on a good day. So yeah, there's no way you can treat this disease and get out of the situation. You have to, as we found to our cost, despite a lot of work and a lot of cleanups and a lot of time empty, depupping the barn and repopping with a completely new source of animals is the only long-term solution. That's that slide finished. I think that's the presentation finished, actually.
Thank you, Barrie and Chris. That was excellent information. I think before we move on to Dr. Costa, we did have one question here in the chat related to this slide, I think. So perhaps what we'll do is we'll address that question and then move on to Dr. Costa's portion of the presentation. So very quickly, and either Barrie, Chris, or Brad, the question was, is the spread from farm to farm is there spread, from farm to farm other than through animal or human transfer? And in the chat, Dr. Loggy did mention that it doesn't appear to move through aerosol, but just was wanting to provide the opportunity to address this question any further. So any farm, other than animals or people, any other ways this could move from farm to farm?
I could take that one, I guess. As I mentioned in the chat, there's no evidence that that it transfers through aerosol from one barn to another. I suppose possibly within a pen or within a room, obviously, you could have transfer through short distances. If you have animals that would happen to be coughing, you could get some aerosolization. But like strep, the other strep bacteria like Strep suis and A suis, and some of the other common bacteria that we see in swine, those don't really seem to transfer, and neither does this one through aerosol spread. It's mostly nose-to-nose contact, or else contaminated fomites, such as equipment, or I guess trailers, barns. I mean, if you're going to depup a barn, you want to make sure that you do a really good job getting it cleaned up before you put clean animals in it. But it does seem like it's possible to kill the bacteria and get rid of it with standard disinfectants. Just got to make sure you do a good job cleaning. We all know that 90% of getting the barn clean is the actual physically getting it clean before you apply the disinfectant. And that holds true with this as well, I believe. But yeah, I think it's mostly through infected animals or transfer of the bacteria physically that moves this thing around.
Thanks, Brad. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Dr. Costa to start sharing his. And while we do that, I would like to welcome Dr. Mateus Costa. He's an assistant professor with large animal clinical sciences at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine, based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And I know he has been also involved in work with Strep Zoo, and I'm very interested to see and hear about what you have to present to us today. So welcome very much, Dr. Costa. Thank you so much for being with us, and please do take it away.
Hi, Jenelle. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come here today and talk to you guys about this intriguing problem. I think you've got a very interesting perspective based on the previous discussion. I will try to help and give a bit more of input regarding transmission. That was a great question, and like Brad said, we don't understand a lot about this bug yet. So essentially, this all started, as you heard, like roughly a little bit over a year ago. And we're trying to gather more information on how we can deal with this bacteria and how we can attempt to control it in a more effective way. I'm assuming everyone's seeing my screen by now. So just a bit of background that may help we understand, and it also hopefully will help us understand transmission, is the fact that Strep zooepidemicus is actually called zooepidemicus because it's able to spread among animals. What this means is that species, so anything from mammals to birds, we seem to be able to isolate it from affected animals. So animals that develop disease, a wide variety of clinical signs are found, and it is just out there. And it's almost challenging to find something that may not have Strep zooepidemicus. A tiny bit of background here. We usually receive a lot of questions regarding should we be worried about Strep zooepidemicus and farm workers. It is definitely something that a question that you should be asking. It has some of those proteins that Streptococcus pyogenes has. And so, but for those who don't know Strep pyogenes, it causes infections in humans. We calculate around 700 million cases all around the globe per year, but not all of them. So what this means is that it potentially could do something harmful, but it doesn't seem to affect humans that bad. It's rarely associated with humans who have been exposed to animals. So, and sometimes exposed to animal products that were not properly treated. So for example, ingesting raw milk. And those patients, so those people that developed disease, they were immune suppressed. So what does this mean is that they were either pregnant or they were of very advanced age or very young. I'm talking about like a few years, less than a year old. So for the general population and the general population that currently is part of the workforce and is in a barn, it is unlikely that you would become sick due to Strep zoo. Probably the chances of becoming sick due to Strep zoo are the same or similar chances as if you would become sick due to Strep suis. So if you can do something to protect yourself, yes, like if doing necropsies or dealing with sick animals or collecting any kind of organic materials from these animals, like make sure you use a mask, make sure you use gloves, and that is probably as good as you can do in a barn. again, rarely associated with disease in humans, but there are the odd cases. So we don't know enough to tell you don't worry about it or to tell you be very careful. So right now, I guess the suggestion is treat it just like you would treat strep suis. You could potentially become sick. For those who don't know, strep suis is the main cause of meningitis in Southeast Asia. So in humans, meningitis is inflammation of the brain membranes. So just like pigs, people can also develop that disease. So it's the same kind of steps you should take to protect yourself. So humans can carry it. Many other animal species can carry it. Brad discussed it a little bit here. I'm just going to give you a bit more background. Pigs can carry strep zoo. In fact, we truly believe that strep zoo is present in every single pig. It is part of what we call the microbiota of the upper respiratory tract. So perhaps the nasal mucosa, perhaps the throat. It's likely that strep zoo, not particularly this one that seems to be very aggressive, but strep zoo in general can be found in healthy pigs. And we found them many times before, up to 2019. And they were what we would call opportunistic pathogens, or just incidental findings. We were not worried about it. We know they can be there and not do any harm. So at the end of the day, that's how we treated strep zoo until 2019. There's never been a report of clinical disease in pigs in North America. Now we're associated with respiratory lesions and sudden death. Like Dr. Brad discussed, it seems to be endemic in China. Back in 1977, there were more than 300,000 pigs killed. Between the 90s and 2000s, there are sporadic cases that are reported. So I'm talking about sporadic outbreaks of mortality, and here and there they would peak up and then go away. It's also present in the Philippines. We know that now that because they attempt to treat the infection using autogenous vaccines, but probably to the same end that we have found here. So this was our understanding of strep zoo until 2019. It's just happened to be there and we happened to find it. Do not worry about it, look for something else. So what we did in 2019 is that we're able to sequence the entire genetic material of this bacteria that were isolated from pigs in Canada. And what we've learned is this. We can tell that they are extremely similar to the ones that we have previously characterized from the China outbreak in 1977. And they are very different from the horse isolates, for example. So what is this telling us? Essentially, there seems to be a link here between the Chinese isolates and the Canadian isolates in 2019, that these specific kind of strep zoo is problematic to pigs. The others are not. They are very different from strep zoo that infect other animals. So horses, dogs, we didn't seem to find any similarity between the pig strep zoo and the other species. That doesn't mean they don't have them. It just means that the ones that cause disease to pigs, they don't seem to be problematic for other species. Doesn't mean that these other species don't carry them. So they could be vectors. And again, they're very, very similar to the one isolated in 1977 in China. This is some data from experimental infections. So this is a preliminary study, very few animals. Pigs were inoculated with different kinds of strep zoos. So in blue, we have the strep zoo isolated from a horse. In green, strep zoo isolated from a guinea pig. And in red, the swine isolates. And as you can see, what we're seeing here is percentage of animals in the study that survived over time. After roughly 2 and 2.5 days of inoculation, all of the pigs inoculated with the swine isolate had died. The ones inoculated with the guinea pig isolate, not all of them died, but a lot of them would die and some would still survive. The horse isolates seem to be harmless to pigs. All pigs infected with the horse strep zoo survived the experimental challenge. So they were followed for 15 days. So as you can see, I guess the take-home message here is, if your pigs are exposed to this particular kind of strep zoo, and just like everyone mentioned before, things are going to move very fast. You don't have a lot of time, to go around. You are going to have to act quickly here. So a huge challenge. Luckily, PDS is now capable of detecting this bug. So Barrie Diagnostic Service, your veterinarian can be in contact with them, and they can try to figure out what's going on fairly fast here. So this is what we have learned so far about this bug. So it is what we call ST194. This is just a name so that we can track this particular kind of Strep zooepidemicus among all the others. Between 1977 and 2019, so 1977 was the outbreak in China, 2019 is when we found here in Canada. The only other time we found this specific kind of swine strep zoo was actually in the UK, and it was in a human. This was a blood sample, and they happened to go traveling. Now, we don't know where they happened to go. All we know is that they had infection due to strep zoo, and it was the pig strep zoo. We don't know any other time that this particular strep zoo, the pig strep zoo, has been isolated in this side of the globe between 1977 and 2019. That doesn't mean we didn't have it, and it's not going around. It just means that we did not find it. So historically associated with pigs, interestingly, we think it is endemic in this area here, so Southeast Asia. We happened to have our first case in Canada in March 2019. After that, there were several other cases associated with this specific strep zoo from pigs in North America, so in the United States, Ohio, Tennessee. Interestingly, in October 2019, something similar showed up in the Netherlands. It was not the exact same strep zoo. It seemed to be a bit different from what we have here and what isolated from China, but it caused very similar problems. So that's how we connected at the day, is because we're both countries here, Canada and the Netherlands, were reporting the same kind of problems. It's kind of a different strep zoo, but yet both times we found strep zoo in those pigs. Another case in Pennsylvania, so that was later in that year. And then finally, very early on, so in August 2018, so before we even really clued in that strep zoo would be a problem here, there were cases associated with the same strep zoo we found in Canada in New Zealand. So this was a outdoor commercial facility. So pigs are housed outdoor. They are very low stress, if we put it in that perspective. And they essentially, we found the exact same problem. At the end of the day, it's hard to connect all these points, but they seem to somehow be connected, because we couldn't find this bug until then, and now we can see it everywhere. Sorry, I forgot to add that there was also a case in Indiana here in September 2019. So essentially, there's not enough data or confirmation that where this thing came from, but if it's endemic in Southeast Asia and we couldn't find it before there, perhaps we should start looking there, or perhaps we should just at least get our biosecurity hats on and make sure we don't create more problems for ourselves. So current investigations, current things we're trying to understand here is why. So why is this strep zoo problematic for pigs, and why is it appearing right now? Like, what has changed? So this was a work together with the University of Saskatchewan, University of Manitoba, and Agriculture Manitoba Ministry, looking at specific genetic mutations. We're going to talk about this. Essentially, what we have learned is the following. Imagine, just need my pointer back here. Imagine that this little thing here is strep zoo, and this is your pig cells. So your pig cells, they need to detect strep zoo in order to kill it. Strep zoo this particularly pig-associated strep zoo has some mutations. It has a mutation on a particular receptor here that pigs use to identify strep zoo. So this mutation could be the cause why now they can escape the pig immune defense and cause disease. And this particular kind of strep zoo we have also has a mutation associated with this anti-immune system protein. So what it does is that it seems to activate this defense more often than other kinds of strep zoo. So not only it may have something different that the pig can't recognize, it also seems to activate this anti-immune system defense more often than other strep zoos. So it's essentially the strep zoo is a bit better at causing disease because it has this specific mutations, and they could be the problem. They could be the source of why now, why is strep zoo coming up now as a problem, and why is it so aggressive, right? It's a disease that kills pigs in a very short time period. So one of the explanations we have right now of why this is so aggressive, it's because of these mutations. What we're moving on to now is how, and so essentially we're trying to understand how it causes disease. There were initial trials performed at USDA, APHIS, and ISU, so Iowa State University. That's where they essentially gave pigs a lot of strep zoo through their noses, and they were able to replicate the disease. So looks like if you get a lot of strep zoo in your nose and you're a pig, you will die in the next 48 hours. We don't have much more data other than that from these studies. So there's still a need to further characterize how the disease works. We'll talk about it in a bit here. Essentially, this is what we understand. So this is Strep zooepidemicus. We know it somehow gain access to the nose, it will become a problem. We don't know if nose-to-nose contact is the only way it will spread between pigs. We don't know if feces are a problem. They do shed, meaning they do release to the environment. They release streps. Once they're infected, they will release the strep zoo to the environment through multiple different ways. So looks like they shed in their feces, they shed in their nasal secretion, saliva. So they essentially become a very good vector. We know humans can be carriers of strep zoo. We don't know what happens particularly with this one. We know, for example, that rodents and birds, again, they all can carry strep zoo around. So someone had a question there about how is this thing spreading from farm to farm? We don't know. What we know so far is this. Nose-to-nose contact seem to be definitely one of the ways. People, potentially other animals that would go in and out and be contaminated or carry this around and be able to go into the farm unnoted. So pests could be a problem. Strep zoo is a very similar bacteria to the one that causes disease in horses. So there is another kind of strep zoo essentially that causes strangles in horses. And what they have learned about that Streptococcus is that it doesn't survive very well in the environment, particularly if there is sun. It will kill this bacteria very efficiently. So if you ever wonder if you need to, besides washing your boots, if you can just leave it outside and sunbathe for a day, it's probably enough to kill the bacteria. It will survive for a couple, maybe 3 to 5 days in the presence of water and organic matter, so feces or carcasses or something else. Again, these are all questions. We don't have the data yet about this. This is something we have learned with other bacteria, and we are extrapolating to this one. One of the other problems we're trying to understand now, besides the problem of how does it get to the pig, is what does it do after. So this is the tonsil of a pig. We think that after it makes its way to the nose, it will reach the tonsil, and then we have no idea how it will spread all over. We can detect strep zoo from essentially anywhere we sample a pig that's sick, we'll detect strep zoo there. We don't know how exactly that happens. We don't know what is so special about it that it breaks the immune defense in the tonsils and spread everywhere very quickly. What we do know is that once it's there, it will make the immune system very confused. So once, this is step one of our research effort here, is understand the disease mechanism and understand how this all happened. Once we understand that, we can move on to trying to control this problem. So vaccines or other treatment options, we're not sure which and if any of these will work. Again, what we do know is that Strep zoo, it confused the immune system. So what I mean by confuse is that it will, at the same time, tell the immune system to activate an inflammatory response. So for example, fever, just like you would have with any other virus or bacteria, but it also tells the immune system to deactivate that inflammatory response. So it also tells the immune system don't have a fever. So it's very, very aggressive to the point that it completely dysregulates the immune response. And the pig has no idea what it's trying to do once it's infected. It's just all over the place, not really making a lot of sense based on what we understand that immune response against a bacteria like this should be. So it's really questionable if a vaccine will be effective in treating this bug. We do have, as everybody knows, we have had a lot of challenge developing a vaccine for Strep suis. And this is, let's put it this way, a cousin of Strep suis. So Strep zooepidemicus, again, could be very problematic to develop a vaccine. That being said, the horse kind of Strep zooepidemicus that causes strangles, they were successful developing a vaccine for that bug. So, not all hope is lost, but we need to be cautious when we say there will be a vaccine to prevent the disease. I guess we'll investigate if we can develop it, and hopefully we'll be able to find something that's effective. If this doesn't work, let's say we are unable to find a way to develop a vaccine that will prevent the disease, there are other options. We'll also be working on something we call virulence blockers. So what this means is essentially, instead of teaching the pig to kill the bug through the immune system, we'll just stop the Strep zooepidemicus from causing any kind of clinical signs. So they're still going to be there. The Strep zoo is still going to be in the pig, but we're essentially going to be given for example, like just to draw a parallel, it's like giving pigs aspirin so that they don't have the headache associated with Strep zoo, right? We're just going to be blocking that feeling so that they don't develop, they don't confuse their immune system and don't have this uncontrolled responses. And therefore, we would treat the disease. You would unlikely to see mortality and unlikely to see that much problem with Strep zoo in the herd. But that being said, like it would be solely a control option. You wouldn't be preventing Strep zoo from entering your herd or anything else. I see the chat is flashing here. I'm just gonna have to turn off my pointer. Again, just wanted to acknowledge everyone that has helped us with these investigations. Jenelle, am I good to answer questions in the chat here? How would you like to do this?
I will take a peek here, Dr. Costa. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
There was one question somebody had asked if anyone knew how it had actually gotten into Manitoba.
I don't think so. I don't think we can track it back then. Back then, there was definitely an effort into trying to figure out how it got there, but unfortunately, there's not enough data to actually make that conclusion.
Okay, we got another question. It's why do you think it kills sows so much more than growing pigs?
Great question. It does kill growing pigs. We're actually, there's some research going on where pigs as young as 6 weeks old were exposed to this bug, and they essentially died the same way sows will die. It's a very quick and aggressive infection. Now, why in the field we're seeing that? We don't know. It could be simply because it entered the barn first through that way, and then they were the first group to be exposed. It could be also because if sows, like I said, during pregnancy, animals become immunosuppressed. So it could be because their immune system kind of have its weapons down, and it just allows strep zoo to cause disease. While growing pigs, they're a bit better at fighting bugs, especially depending if they're after nursery age. So it could be that kind of issue. Yes, yeah, very good point. Yeah, no, they will die. So like I said, anything after 6 weeks old seems to be susceptible to the problem, but there is definitely confounding factors. So other factors that work together with the presence of strep zoo. So stress, pregnancy is a kind of stress. So if pigs are pregnant, they, it all comes together. Anything apparently will fire up strep zoo and get the disease looking as bad as it could.
We got one more question here asking if this is going to be like PEDV in terms of virulence.
Sorry, say it again.
Someone's asking if this is going to be like PEDV in terms of how virulent it is. If we
depending to what group, we don't have any data for nursing piglets, so it could be that they're susceptible. But I guess at the end of the day, it is a pretty scary disease. You may not see 100% mortality. Any of those outbreaks that I pointed out, none of them actually reported 100% mortality like we do with PD sometimes, but pretty high mortality rates ranging from 88% to 80%. That's what we've seen. Good question. Is this a notifiable virus? So this is a bacteria and it's not notifiable because this is the first time we're seeing it. So it definitely poses a risk to animal transportation and pig trade. So, but not yet. So let's try to keep it that way and control it before it becomes a big problem.
We got one more question asking if it can be brought into a barn with semen.
We don't know, but data from strangle, so the horse kind of strep, there is controversial data. To be quite honest, like I'd rather not tell you yes or no. We don't know. It's unlikely, but I can't confirm. Perhaps Brad would have some information on that.
I've never heard either. I would think that I mean, if you had a boar that was sick, and feverish and had septicemia, they're probably not going to be collecting very well. But if you were able to collect from that boar, you might be able to get bacteria in the semen.
You'd probably be dead by the time you're trying to collect and just trying all the workout that requires to collect semen, they would probably die. So I guess that would prevent it from spread that way.
Yeah, if you had a boar herd that was endemic, like maybe over in China or something like that, is it possible that maybe that they shed bacteria in their semen from time to time for animals that that are persistently infected with it? Good question. Don't know. It's possible, maybe, eh?
Yeah, no, good point. It is possible, but again, we don't know yet. Like this is something so new, and and I apologize, it's very challenging that way. Most of the questions you guys are gonna have, we're gonna say we don't know. We're trying to figure out, but we don't have the data to say yes or no yet.
I guess I can answer one of those questions there too that came up recently, whether swine vets are on alert for this disease. It has been talked about heavily in the last year amongst the Manitoba swine vets and the Western Canadian swine vets, as was mentioned in our earlier presentation. So yeah, they're all well aware of it.
Are there any other questions this afternoon? Just a comment here from Dr. Jette Christensen, our manager of Quishin, commenting that there has been a lot of information sent out through Quishin, as mentioned by Dr. Loggy. So absolutely the word is out, and very happy to and thankful to Maple Leaf, to Chris and Barrie and Brad and Dr. Costa. Thank you all so much for being with us here this afternoon, all the Maple Leaf crew as well. those working behind the scenes to make this presentation possible. Thank you very much, everybody who participated, who called in this afternoon. Last call, if there's any other questions.
Yeah, there is one here. Somebody had asked if it's possible for an animal to test positive for this before it would show symptoms.
Like I said, it's possible that all pigs have a type of strep zoo. It's just part of their regular bacterial community, so they just have those. But actually finding this bad strep zoo kind, it is possible that they'll test positive, but it is also possible that by the time you get the test results, they're either going to be getting sick or dead, just because it's so aggressive. So very, very challenging to find it that way. Very challenging to prevent it from getting to a barn that way.
Good question. Alrighty. Any other questions on the line there, Arnie?
No, I think you've got them all.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much again to our presenters and to our audience for taking part this afternoon. I believe this is our last producer engagement series of 2020, but we will be getting started back up again in 2021 with a presentation on African swine fever preparedness. So I hope that you can all join us for that presentation. And until then, I wish you all a very happy holiday season. And take care, and we will see you soon. Thank you.